There are roads in this world that seem ordinary enough in the daylight. Narrow, muddy, lined with trees that lean too close together. Roads you would travel 100 times and think nothing of. But there are also nights, certain nights, when even the most familiar road begins to feel like something else entirely. On such a night, a merchant named Marcus rode his horse along the old forest road that cut through the valley of Drenmore. He was a wealthy man, or rather, he believed himself to be wealthy, which, in his experience, amounted to the same thing. He had spent 3 days in the city selling cloth and copper and came away with his satchel heavy and his opinion of himself even heavier. Marcus did not like the forest road. He never had. There was something in it, something in the way the trees pressed together, that made a man feel watched. He spurred his horse a little faster, told himself it was only the cold, told himself it was nothing. But the mist thickened around the horse's legs, and the lantern on his saddle flickered, once, twice, and then went out. It was then that he saw it. A light, small and amber, barely visible through the tree-line. He steered his horse off the road and through the trees until he came to a clearing. And in the clearing, a cottage, small, stone, with a thatched roof and a single candle burning in the window. The kind of home that has nothing to spare. And yet, someone had left the candle burning. Marcus dismounted. He knocked on the door. Not gently. He had never done anything gently, but hard. 3 heavy knocks with his gloved fist. There was a long silence from inside, and then the sound of a child's voice, low and careful, and then footsteps, slow ones, the kind that do not rush to open doors for strangers. The door opened, just a crack, and through that crack appeared the face of a man, tall, thin, hollow in the cheeks, eyes that were kind but careful. Behind him, just visible in the amber candlelight, a woman, and beside her, gripping the fabric of her dress in both small hands, a child. Wide brown eyes, saying nothing, but watching everything. The man's name was Edvard. He let the merchant in, because that is what people do when they have very little and someone is cold and lost in the dark. They let them in. The cottage was a single room, a stone fireplace, a rough wooden table, 2 chairs and a stool. A pot of something thin and pale hanging over the fire. Enough for 3, not quite enough for 4. Marcus sat at the table. He looked around the cottage the way men look at things they consider beneath them. The cracked walls, the patched curtain over the window, the boy's thin wrists. And he said, in the voice he used when he wished to sound generous, "You live very simply." Edvard looked at him quietly from across the room. "We live," he said. "That is enough." Mara, the mother, ladled out 4 portions. 4, even though the pot had only held 3. She handed Marcus the largest bowl. She gave Edvard the next. She gave little Pip the 3rd. And she herself sat down with something so thin it was almost only hot water. And she smiled, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. Marcus looked at his bowl, then at hers. And for the first time in a very long time, he did not know what to say. They ate in near silence. The fire crackled. The boy fell asleep on the stool and was carried to his small bed by his father without a word. Marcus was given the 1 spare blanket and told he could sleep by the fire. He settled down, closed his eyes, and then, just as the fire burned to its lowest, just as the cottage fell into the deepest part of its silence, there was a knock at the door. Not 3 heavy knocks. Not the knock of a traveler or a neighbor. Just one. A single, slow knock. Like a stone dropped into deep water. Edvard was already awake. He rose without hesitation, wrapped his coat around his shoulders, and opened the door. There was a woman standing in the doorway. Old. Very old. With bone-white hair loose around her shoulders and pale gray eyes that seemed to hold their own light. She wore a dark cloak, and her feet, Marcus noticed this immediately from across the room, her feet were bare. In the cold, in the mud, bare. She carried only a small cloth bundle at her side, and she said nothing. She only looked at Edvard. and waited. Edvard looked at the old woman for a moment. Just a moment. Then he stepped aside, and he said, simply, quietly, without any ceremony, "Come in." Mara was already on her feet. She brought the spare chair. She took the last two pieces of wood beside the fireplace and laid them on the dying fire. The flames rose again, small, but warm, and she boiled the last of their water. For tea, from herbs she had been saving. For themselves. Marcus watched all of this from his place by the fire. He watched, and he could not quite understand what he was seeing. These people had almost nothing. He knew that. He had catalogued their poverty the moment he walked through the door. The cracked walls, the thin soup, the boys' worn shoes by the door. And yet, without a moment of hesitation, they had given their last wood, their last herbs, their last warmth, to a stranger who had not even asked. He thought of his satchel, heavy with coins, sitting on the floor 2 feet from his hand. He thought of the bowl of soup, the largest bowl, that Mara had given him without being asked. He thought of Edvard's words. "We live. That is enough." And for the first time in a very long time, Marcus the merchant felt something cold move through him that had nothing to do with the night air. The old woman drank her tea. Slowly, in silence. Mara sat across from her, not watching, just present, as if sitting with a stranger in the middle of the night was simply what one did. After a long time, the old woman set down her cup, and she looked at Mara. "You have very little," the old woman said. Her voice was low, like the sound a door makes when it opens slowly in an empty house. Mara nodded once. "Yes," she said, "but we have each other, and we have warmth. And tonight, we have you." The old woman was quiet for a long time after that. Then she turned her head, slowly, and she looked directly at Marcus. Not at the fire, not at the room, at him, as if she had known he was there all along. As if she had come, in fact, not for the warmth, but for him. "You carry a great weight," the old woman said to Marcus. Her pale eyes did not blink. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it again. "My satchel is heavy," he said carefully. "Yes," said the woman. "That too." A long silence filled the room. The fire crackled once. From the back room, the sound of the boy breathing in his sleep. Slow, peaceful, completely unaware. And in that sound, something in Marcus's chest shifted, like a heavy stone moved from a place it had been sitting for a very long time. In the gray hour before morning, Marcus rose. The old woman was gone. He did not know when she had left. He had not heard the door, had not heard a single footstep, but the chair where she had sat was empty. And on the table, where her cup had been, there was now a single small flower. White, perfectly still, blooming fully. In the dead of winter, Marcus stood over the table for a long time, looking at the flower. He reached into his satchel, and he counted out coins. Not a few. Not what a man leaves when he wishes to feel generous, but enough. Enough for a winter's worth of wood. Enough for flour and salt and boots for the boy. Enough that the pot over the fire would never hold only 3 portions again. He stacked the coins beside the flower. Quietly, in the dark, while the family slept, he picked up his satchel. Lighter now, much lighter. He pulled on his coat, his boots, his hat. He paused at the door, turned once to look at the room, at the sleeping cottage that had given him, without asking anything in return, warmth, and soup, and a blanket, and something far more difficult to name. Then he opened the door, and stepped out into the cold. The forest road looked different in the early morning light. The same trees, the same mud, the same mist along the ground. And yet, Marcus rode through it more slowly than he had the night before. There was no rush now, or perhaps more accurately, he had suddenly, for the first time in a long time, no interest in rushing. The trees did not press in on him. The darkness did not watch him. The road was simply a road. He thought about wealth on that ride. He had thought about it many times before, of course, but always in the same direction, more. Always more. And now, for the first time, he thought about it differently. He thought about a woman who divided 3 portions into 4, without hesitation, without resentment. He thought about a man who opened his door to a stranger at midnight with nothing but a single candle between himself and the dark. And he thought about a little boy with wide brown eyes who had watched everything and said nothing and understood, perhaps, more than any of them. He never saw the old woman again. He asked in every village along the valley road. An old woman, barefoot, white hair, a dark cloak, and no one had seen her. No one had heard of her. And after a while, he stopped asking, because it seemed to him that some things are not meant to be found again. They come once, in the dark, when your lantern has gone out, and then they are gone. And what they leave behind is entirely up to you. And so this is the story of Marcus the merchant, a man who rode into a dark forest believing he owned the most valuable thing in it, and rode out understanding that the most valuable things are almost never the things we carry in our satchels. They are the things we give away in the dark, without being asked, without expecting anything in return, to strangers who knock once and wait. Marcus rode into that forest believing he had everything. He rode out knowing he had been missing the most important thing all along. If this story made you feel something, that feeling is yours to keep. Press like if you want more souls to find it too. And subscribe to English Story Hunter, because the forest road is long and there are many more stories ahead.